Okay, Mark.
Good evening. Welcome to the City of River Falls, Wisconsin Utility Advisory Board meeting for January 18th of 2022. In the absence of a chairperson, our chairperson, I, as the vice chair, will be running at least the beginning of this meeting. So one other thing is, at the request, as the temporary chair, I did ask the UAB meetings be set up as a hybrid meeting for now. This allows members to be remote or in the chambers. So I just want to thank the city for doing that. Lene, may we have a roll call, please?
Garrell, Morset,
Here.
Spafford,
Here.
Toom,
Here.
Quispetto,
Here.
Wells Mangold.
Here.
Thank you. Next, we'll have the approval of the minutes of the November 15th, 2021 meeting.
I move approval.
I second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on the meeting minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Thank you. Minutes are approved. This is the time in our meeting that we allow for public comment. John, I believe I saw someone walk up to sign in. And if anybody has public comment, we wish that you come up to the microphone and start your discussion with your name and your address.
First, may I take my mask off, or is that, should I not?
You may take your mask off. It'd be easier for us to hear you. Thank you.
It rubs your chin when you're talking. My name is Patricia LaRue. I live at 489 Marcella Court. For the last 4 years, I've addressed the Utility Advisory Board at the beginning of the year regarding the production of our community hydroelectric dams. This year, the Junction Falls Dam, working alone obviously, produced over 1,300,000 kilowatt hours in 2021. That equates to revenues of over $144,000. Last year, if you recall, our hydros produced over 1,800,000 kilowatt hours with revenues just shy of $200,000. And that was with Powell Falls sidelined for 3 months. That was all I was going to say, but I see that there is a touching base on the Kinni Collaborative today. And as I mentioned to you guys in July, these are very hardworking people. They have tried a lot of things like GoFundMe. They have Steve Goff doing pro bono work. They have Tony Steiner doing grant work for them. And I just want to say that there's also a presentation tonight that Mike Noreen has been able to sell 2,800 blocks of energy, 28,000 blocks of energy over the past year. And I do know that the Kinni Collaborative is trying really hard with DNR grants and grants from private firms. I don't know who to look at, private firms. And I think it would be more impressive if there was a grassroots, if they could get 28,000 people to donate $3 a month. That would just be, well, they don't have, Mike Doreen doesn't have 28,000 people. He has 28,000 blocks of energy. But the point being, if there was, even if it wasn't as much as the DNR could give them, if there was a grassroots public support of all those people who came before you and those people who promised that they would support and they wanted the dams out, if somehow those people could come forward with $5 a month, $3 a month, just something to show that we're not, it's all going to be taxpayer money, DNR, Army Corps of Engineers, etc. So that's just coming up kind of ad lib when I saw that there was going to be something about that. And again, I always want to thank the Utility Advisory Board for your hard work. and learning about sleeves in the sewer lines and biosolids, et cetera, et cetera. You guys do very good work, and I have every confidence that you have our dollars in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. LaRue. Any other comments from the public? Doesn't seem that I see anyone coming forward. All right, thank you. Now we'll move into the consent agenda. Can I get an acknowledgement of the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility Commission for October 14th of 21?
I move approval on the consent agenda.
Second.
This is Kellen, I'll second. Oh, Tim got it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on those minutes? Kevin, anything?
No, they seem kind of old now, looking back to October, so a lot of other things have transpired, but nothing else to add.
Thank you. Okay, hearing nothing else, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Now we'll move into new business, which has to do with the first thing on our list is election of officers. So currently we have a big vacated spot for the chair, and I'm currently the vice chair. So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor for nominations for the position of chair. Are there any nominations for the chair position?
I nominate Mark Spafford as chair.
Okay, we have a second. And any other nominations? I would
May I
nominate.
ask who's the second? I didn't hear that.
That was Tim.
Okay,
Tim.
thank you.
And I would have a second nomination of Kellen Wells Mangle.
Second.
Okay, any other nominations? And one more time, are there any other nominations? Okay, since there are no other nominations, nominations at this point are closed. Does Mr. Kellen Wells Mangle accept the nomination as chair?
I'll accept.
Well,
Okay,
I think we need to vote. I think we need to vote because there was two people nominated for chair.
okay. I understood that you had to get approval of the people who wanted to be nominated.
Okay. All right.
So at this point, I will step away from the nomination, so we really have one person on the nomination.
Okay.
So since Kellen is the only nominee, those in favor of Kellen Wells Mangle as the chair indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. And those opposed, the same? Okay. So Mr. Kellen is now the chair. And I think I can go forward with the nomination for the vice chair and then after that, I'll pass the baton off to Kellen to run the rest of the meeting. So is there I'd like to open the floor for nominations for the position of vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
Mark, I think you've been doing a good job. I'll nominate you for vice chair.
Okay.
Second.
We have a second. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? And the third time, are there any nominations for the vice chair position? Okay, so the nominations for vice chair are closed, and I do accept the nomination So all those in favor of Mark Spafford as the vice chair indicate by saying aye.
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 And all those opposed? All right, looks like Mark Spafford or myself will remain as the vice chair. So at this point in time, I'm actually going to pass this off to Kellen now that he is the chair. You okay with that, Kellen?
Yes, I will do my best, and I appreciate everyone's flexibility. It kind of is a circus at my house at the moment, so I'm going to leave my video off, but I am still with everybody. Moving on to the next item of new business, we have the resolution recommending Troy Street to East Pomeroy Street, Watermain Realignment Construction Contract to Skid Steer Guy.
So Kellen, we do have our city engineer, Todd McCluskey, here to just give you a brief 90-second overview of this project and then stand for questions if you should have some on the water main relocation in this area.
All right, can everybody see and hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Nice to actually get a chance to speak in front of this group. Good evening, Utility Board. I'm going to give you a really brief rundown of this project. It has been lingering on the shelves for quite some time now. This project originated because the business residing at Troy Street, as shown in the drawing here, would like to expand. As you can tell by the blue line shown in this drawing here, there is a water main running right to the southwest of their building. So the intent of this project is to replace a water main, put a water main in a different location to allow that building to expand. So what you see here is the blue line that kind of goes north and then east, and north and then east, and north and then east and north, is the existing water main that will be abandoned after we install the new water main, which is shown in red. After the new water main is installed, we will release the utility easements in which those existing water mains are installed, and that will allow this business to expand. Does anybody have any questions?
Who bears the cost of that if it's for that one single building?
I'm going to defer to
Yeah. So the city utility department will front that cost, and this one paid for out of our fund balance or cash reserves. We feel this is a good investment for the industrial park to allow this potential expansion, and so we've decided that to move ahead with this expansion, this relocation at this time.
I think I know the answer here, but I think it has to do with the number of turns in the line. But I know, frankly, across the street, we had another line. Now that happened to be a sewer line, I believe, that ran under a proposed expansion of a building, of a business across the street. And we allowed them to build over the top of that line, but we lined it beforehand. Again, that was a sewer line, not a water line. We wouldn't have the option of keeping this and lining it, or you would have brought that to us, I assume, but is that not a feasible option here?
I don't think that's a best practice for a water main.
Okay.
I will admit that I was not involved in the design of this project. If somebody would have recommended that as an alternative, I would have said I don't think that's a good alternative.
Okay. Thank you.
If that easement is going to be removed for that old line or the existing line, soon to be the old line, does that pipe stay in the ground or does that have to be removed?
The pipe will stay in the ground. What we'll do is where the pipe is basically disconnected from the existing water main, it'll get plugged with concrete, so we don't end up having with sinkholes or anything with groundwater infiltrating or rainwater infiltrating into the pipe.
Kevin, or would somebody be able to speak to the low bid?
I can do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank
Todd can. So we were pretty. First, I'll just comment and say we're pretty pleased with that bid.
We were pleased with the both the number of responsive bidders. I think there was 7 of them, and the low bidder price, which was, I believe, around $180,000, which was actually below the engineer's estimate of $192,000. Skidster Guy is the name of the company, and he has done work in the city before. He's done work for the UW. The engineer who performed the bidding for us was SEH, and they went out and researched whether or not they felt he could adequately perform the work, and they said yes. So we think it's a good bid.
And this project, given the size, we're not going to require a performance bond.
We will require
We
some
will.
performance bonding, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I think so. Okay.
Any other discussion from anybody? Okay, so can I get a motion to recommend awarding the contract for the Troy Street to East Pomeroy Watermain Realignment Construction project to Skid Steer Guy?
I'll make a motion to award that contract to the skid steer guy.
I'll second. This is Mark.
Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, resolution is adopted. Moving on to the next item of business. It looks like we have a presentation on the Kinni Corridor Collaborative.
Yes, Collins. Our city administrator, Scott Simpson, is here tonight to give a brief overview of where we're at with the KCC and the dam removal and relicensing project. Scott?
Thank you, Kevin. You hear me okay? It's coming through. If you allow it, on his first day in his new position, our new finance director, Josh Solinger, is here. So Josh, you want to come up quick? Yeah. Just make an introduction. I imagine Josh will be at future utility advisory board meetings, provide you some great financial news. But just wanted to take the opportunity to welcome Josh on and introduce him to the UAB members that are here, both in the council chambers and at attending virtually. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
I won't make him give a speech because he didn't know that he was getting introduced.
I had a little pep talk with him, Scott, before. I said, it's like a $20 million operation. It's not that big of a deal. Keep trying.
So thanks. I'm gonna pull this over. So I can see Mr. Spafford on my screen while I'm presenting. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand if you'd like to do that. And for Mr. Wells Mangold and Mr. Toom, if you have questions, your audio is live, so you can feel free to interrupt me. I'm presenting this evening at the request of, I'm not sure whose request it is. It might be the utility director's request. Just to want to give I've been working with the KCC since its inception. I've been involved in the project for relicensing that since I guess way back when, even before Chuck Brannick, the then electric superintendent, kind of gave an update to UAB back in 2014 and some of the work that we did prior to that. So thought it'd be helpful to just kind of update where we're at. This is not intended to be a complete look back in time, how we all of the ways that we got to today. There's plenty of information on the both on a number of websites. So I'll mention a couple. So the city's website, we have information about the Kinni corridor planning project and a hyperlink that takes you then to the municipal utilities website, which has a lot of information, historical timelines, filings and things with FERC and that through the relicensing process. And then there's the Kinni, I'll give these websites later in the presentation, but we have the Kinni, let's see if we're hot here. We have the Kinni Corridor Collaborative has a website, and there's some information being compiled there. And then we also have, when we went through the Kinni Corridor plan process, there's a website for that. So I'll provide those websites at the end of the presentation if you're looking for more information. I'm happy to answer questions this evening as I can. My primary focus is to talk about the partnership that the city, by extension, the Utility Advisory Board and the City Council has with the Kinni Corridor Collaborative. So the KCC, the Kinni Corridor Collaborative, is now a 501(c) registered not-for-profit organization. The purpose of the KCC was identified in the recitals for the MOU in 2019, and those purposes were primarily, I'm summarizing now, a partnership with the City of River Falls to provide public and private philanthropic funding for implementing projects in that corridor plan. It also was intended to bridge connections with all of the various community groups that were involved in the Kinni plan process, including those that were identified as official stakeholders in the FERC relicensing process, and also to help provide education and awareness of what's going on with this project in the community and support opportunities for further funding. So KCC is not just about raising private funds for the public project. In the MOU, I'm going to summarize a few of the things I think are important to keep in mind as we go forward. So the policy framework of the MOU was, at the time, the community felt it was important to kind of form an official public-private partnership to seek funds for the corridor plan. As some of you who were involved at the time know, or those that were living in the community at the time are aware, there was a number of conversations about how easy this would be, how hard it would be, where the money would come from, who was going to pay for it, all the different pros and cons of taking out the hydros, leaving the hydros in, continuing to operate, reinvest versus disinvest in the hydros. And so there was lots of voices coming, and the thought was that we wanted to have a kind of a place that we could go to have this partnership to seek funds for the projects that are identified in the corridor plan. Specifically, the MOU discusses a couple dates that are key. The Powell being removed by 2026, or the lower hydro dam, and the junction removed by 2040. There's also, I don't know if you'd call it a clause or a mention in there that I think is worth pointing out. There is some talk about, could this junction falls, the upper, be removed prior to 2040? And if so, if there's some reasons laid out which that might occur, then the policy framework calls for us to try as a community through the public-private partnership to identify how do we address any lost revenue that we would lose by closing it early before that 2040 date. And then it has a policy framework for this responsible financing plan, which is much discussed. Specifically, it defines responsible financing plan as no use of local general property taxes. So that I wanted to just pause at this moment because there has been some discussion, or I've heard some communication by members of the council or others that the Kinni Corridor Collaborative is to raise the entire amount of money for this project, and that there isn't to be use of public funds, or there was never an anticipation that all of these others would come forward with the money. And that frankly wasn't even the assumption in 2019 when the MOU was adopted. Several public meetings emphasized the impact of ratepayers versus property taxpayers. The council was specific in its use of local general property tax. At the time, it was discussed that we have a number of other funds of the city, including enterprise funds, that may be responsible ultimately for parts of this project, and that certainly we will try to minimize the impacts to the ratepayers, but the council kind of drew a line in the sand on general property taxes. Now, it's not to say that the impacts of general property taxes and rates of the electric utility don't fall often on the same folks, but there is a difference in the list of folks that pay it. There's a difference in the amount or distribution of who pays electric rates and who pays property taxes. And ultimately, the hydros are owned by the city, and the operation and maintenance, including licensing, permitting, and ultimately the removal of any of those capital investments are electric fund expenses. And I believe that was stated at several public meetings and forums throughout the process that we went through. Frankly, with the electric fund being the primary fund of the city, kind of responsible for ultimate removal based on what FERC comes up with and requires of us. So what's the point of the MOU? How do we summarize what the goals were? What is the things that we thought in 2019 that we would expect from each party? So first, the KCC is identified as the primary philanthropic partner. In other words, the city and its work with others that might be interested in supporting this project would either, depending on your definition, would funnel or refer or coordinate with the KCC for those funding sources. And not just philanthropic partner doesn't just mean bringing in the money, although that's a primary responsibility of a philanthropic partner. But it's also to build awareness for the project, both locally and at a greater awareness in order to take advantage of people that might be interested in supporting the project that are beyond our borders, but also to attract expertise. One of the things that was expected in order to pull off a project of this magnitude, recall, we're not just talking about removing the physical dams, but also doing a number of related projects along the corridor in the Kinni Corridor Plan that involved recreation and habitat restoration and other things, is to try to attract expertise, or otherwise known as in-kind or volunteer donations to this project. What it did is it set out in the MOU is a framework to do letters of agreements or LOAs. There was some concern at the time by the council in particular that the MOU was too broad, there wasn't enough commitment by the parties, and what's the details? Tell me the specifics. And so the LOAs are intended to be the specific agreements between the city and the KCC in completing these projects. So it defines specific, first of all, what is the project and what isn't? What are we doing? And then each LOA is going to be separate, has to be separately approved by the city council. It did in the MOU talk about a funding horizon for all of these LOAs being completed by 2029. So that's another thing I wanted to point out to the group tonight, that already in 19, we didn't expect the money to be here in 21 or 22 or maybe not even 23, that the funding horizon that was outlined in the MOU was this 2029 to be further defined in LOAs. And we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. So what do I think as a city administrator of the KCC, based on my read and involvement in the MOUs and all of these, what is the KCC funding commitments at this point? The KCC is committed to funding its own operation. That's spelled out in the MOU, that the goal is that they'll be an operating nonprofit that can generate enough funds to do their own postage and do their websites and the other things going forward. They did make a specific commitment in the MOU that's not yet put in an LOA, but they made a specific commitment to $60,000 of an anticipated $120,000 FERC ILP plans, or at the time we were really talking about this decommissioning plan to be put together by heirs. We also talked about them raising funds for specific public improvements And we had the implementation plan within the Kinni Corridor plan. So if you go in like page 70 of the Kinni Corridor plan, there's a section or chapter all about implementation. And that section lists a number of projects that were anticipated. It has dollar signs for is it $1 sign, something that's kind of smaller that can be accomplished, like signage, trail signage, or is it a big thing like the Lake George stormwater rehabilitation or the downtown stormwater rehabilitation project that's got, I think, $4 signs after it. So it laid out in there kind of what are the plans that could be done and pointed us all to say, hey, when we're ready to do those projects, need to be a specific letter of agreement so that the council knows what to expect from the KCC, what the KCC knows to expect from the council, kind of who's doing what in the project, who's bringing what money and what expertise to the project to get it done. And then it specifically identified kind of milestones and said those are going to be in the LOAs. But overall in the MOU, it already talked about a $5 million project that's primarily for the Powell removal, the lower removal, and then stream restorations projects. So we kind of put early in the mind of the KCC, there's a big $5 million goal to be raised through various sources to do these projects. What's the city committed through that MOU? The city committed to basically run through the FERC ILP process and cover the expenses required by FERC to do that. My slide says 500,000 to date, and that's accurate, but a more accurate number, which is more than 500,000, we're plus 700,000 to date on expenses, and that may include some of the Kinni Corridor planning and other things that people could argue about whether that's part of the process or not part of the process. But to date we've spent that, plus there's been Army Corps of Engineer in kind and planning services in addition to that. So that kind of matches up with that. If you take the 750 plus a couple 100,000 for the Army Corps of Engineers, that's that $1 million number that you probably heard from the utility director about expenses to date. And we made that commitment in the MOU. We've made that commitment through resolutions. We're committed to doing that as a city. It also said that the city would include these LOA projects and whatever the FERC requires us to do in our capital improvement plan. We've got that in the capital improvement plan right now for an additional estimated 1.4 million from 22 to 24. In the approved capital plan that the council has approved, in the plan that the council has approved, they've anticipated $1 million of that 1.4 being from the state of Wisconsin and 400,000 or the remaining to be from electric revenue. Now this does not include sanitary or storm sewer utility costs, which at this time we expect to be nominal or not substantial as part of the project. It's looking more and more like the decommissioning of the hydro will not involve significant efforts on the part of reinforcing sanitary sewer crossings or significant changes to outfalls with stormwater. So that's good news as far as our decommissioning plan. But I want to emphasize that that's not included in the current capital plan. That may be, as the UAB is responsible for providing advice on all utilities, there may be some projects and LOAs going forward that include sanitary or water or storm sewer. We also made it known in there that we expected that if these projects were contributed to the community and if the city council accepts a letter of agreement that includes a specific project, that we were anticipating in advance that those projects could be sold with the idea that the city would be on the hook for long-term maintenance of those projects. Obviously, the council doesn't have to accept a project that it doesn't think it can accept the maintenance, but we wanted to set the tone for the KCC if they're going out to raise funds, and that's a requirement that's something the council would consider. And then the city also committed to spending money and effort on key funding priorities and efforts. So we've got among those, we've already started in haste the comprehensive plan and the bicycle and pedestrian plan, and then we have kind of in our long range planning, looking at that Lake George area stormwater treatment concept plan. Some people call that the Riverwalk plan, or the downtown stormwater interceptor plan. So that's kind of removing all the outfalls that are going into the Kinni and the downtown, getting them into a piping them to the south, and then building some bays or ways to kind of do filtering of the water before it's released into the river. And that project has been in the history of the city independent of whether the dam stays in or the dam goes out. That project is kind of a project that can be done whether the upper is left or the upper is taken out. And we also have the stormwater shoreline ordinance and the downtown design master plans that the city anticipated it would be doing over the next 20. This is a 25-year MOU that we would be redoing those plans at our expense. So the current city and KCC goal is to focus on a single LOA. So we want to try to get ourselves off on one letter of agreement, and that would be primarily focusing or almost wholly focusing on the physical removal of the Powell Falls Dam. So taking out the infrastructure that we're required to remove by FERC, kind of protecting bridges, sanitary, other things that may be impacted by that, and getting that project done in a single project LOA. And that would include seeking funding from federal, state, and local sources, primarily through the DNR Municipal Dam Grant, which we'll talk a little bit about. Army Corps of Engineers, which I apologize for using all these acronyms, and we're not using the same ones in slides, so we'll get better at that. But the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is looking into feasibility of helping us do all these projects. So that's one thing. And then also getting this LOA would also include local stakeholder group support. In other words, it's not just the money, but we'd be asking KCC to round up the support. So when we go through this decommissioning plan, all the stakeholders are supporting us through those steps. So this is just a snapshot that's been presented to the council to kind of give you an idea of where we're at. We know that things have changed from when we passed the MOU in 2019. One particular event that people want, that we always focus on, is this flooding event and the choice to shut down the Powell Dam. We also have a pandemic that we've been going through virtually since we made these agreements with the parties. So everybody's been doing their best to work through that, deal with the flood, be flexible. And so we're still in that impact from flood risk. So we're still we brought the drawdown down. We're still in that case where we're watching that, monitoring it, and we'll have this spring to get through for sure. What's going to happen with spring flooding, and can we control the amount of sediment released into the downstream? So we are thinking of a number of LOAs. There's probably 5 of them on the table right now with KCC, including things like restoration or enhancement of the lower Kinni area. So that would be things above and beyond what FERC requires us to do. So those would be things that groups want to see, like prairie or savanna restoration, or specialized fauna or wildlife improvements, kind of the extras beyond what the minimum of the electric utility would need to be required. So that would have to be in a separate LOA, so the city knows exactly what the commitments it's making. Recreational amenities, specific launches or fishing areas or other things that are kayak portages, things that are recreational in nature that are beyond the scope of the FERC removal. Monitoring plan is one of the things that some of the stakeholder groups, DNR and others, are talking about doing a collaborative monitoring plan where UWRF and the city and others work together to do monitoring. And then there is a forgive me, I can't think of the name that's mentioned in the Kinni corridor plan, but where the former power plant is, there's talk of kind of restoring that area for some kind of public recreational launch, fishing area, et cetera. So that would be a separate, in our mind as city staff, that's a separate LOA that we'd have to see in detail what the commitments of the city. So in summary, I want to say the KCC is our primary non-governmental partner helping to obtain non-utility funding for removal. They are to try to gather voices. They are responsible for the commitments that they've made to us in writing. They are not responsible for commitments, verbal commitments, or anything else that KRLT, Friends of the Kinni, Patagonia, petitioners from Seattle or San Francisco or Chicago or Minneapolis, or even the local Trout Unlimited or the Minneapolis Trout Unlimited made to the city. And there's been a number of things that people can point to say, but you told us you'd give us this, that, or the other thing. KCC is not responsible for what other people told the city they were going to give us. They're responsible for the things that they've agreed in writing to do, and they're working diligently to do that. They are channeling with some of those groups with some success. One effort I can point to that's a success is a successful lobbying effort, which in my opinion would not have been successful without the city, our local elected representatives at the state level, the Trout Unlimited local chapter, KCC members, board members. They essentially increased the eligibility from 400,000 to $1 million. So that's plus 600,000 of eligible grant money that I expect the city will be successful in receiving. That's a specific example of what the KCC said. We need to do this, and they did that without an LOA, without getting some promise of anything, because they felt it was already within the MOU what we had agreed we were going to do together. They've also helped try to publicly advocate for the changes due to the flood with FERC. So when Kevin was kind of dealing with FERC and the utility director was dealing with FERC and figuring that out, the KCC board members have been supportive. They've been making phone calls to the DNR and FERC and letters to FERC and to our representatives to support that. They also are building a network of supporters for future phases. So they understand that the city's heard a lot of what some of us consider promises about money that's going to be coming. And so they are kind of following up a lot of those leads with people that they've heard whisper or say out loud, well, this is a great project. Of course, everybody's going to want it. And then they are, in fact, trying to follow up with those foundation boards, individual donors, habitat groups, and others to try to get our network built for supporting it going forward in the future phases. So with that, I hope that covered some of what you're interested and not too much of what you're not interested in. I'll mention the kinnicc.org. So it's KINNICC.org is the Kinni Corridor Collaborative's website. And the city has maintained the KinniCorridor.org website. So that's KINNICORRIDOR.org. And so that's the website that kind of outlines the Kinni Corridor plan process and includes the Kinni Corridor plan. So with that, I'm going to, I think John will probably switch back to the WebEx, and we can go back to any of my slides if you have questions. But I'd be happy to stand for any questions that I might be able to answer for you.
Are there any questions from the board?
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Simpson. I do appreciate you coming in and speaking to us to the best of my recollection. I think we heard from you on March 15th, according to my notes. You had come in one of our virtual meetings, and Kevin gave a great presentation on where we were at the time, for money that we needed, money that we'd hoped would have already come in. One of the things that you said at that point was that you had hoped that the fundraising wouldn't have been so far behind. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit towards that. I mean, that was not quite a year ago, and they were already behind then. And what your feelings are when it comes to the MOU and the KCC's efforts to work with the stakeholders to draw in that money.
Thank you. So I think in some ways they're in better shape than they were. So I think they're ahead in some aspects. In particular, I'm not sure in March I would have been as optimistic about that 600, what I consider to be a $600,000 raise. So I think that we're essentially ahead. In fact, we're not even eligible to make the application yet for that grant. So the fundraising effort or the lobbying effort is ahead of where we actually can. So in that case, I think the KCC is moving ahead of us, which is good. We still haven't seen a check or a presentation or anything for the $60,000 for the decommissioning. And so I think in that aspect, and that's probably some of the things I was talking about in March, in that aspect, we still haven't seen that money. Now they did raise money and use money for the lobbying effort. So I would say some of the money that they may have otherwise given us a check for $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 they've used for the lobbying effort. So I don't know if that's a fair assessment or that kind of summarizes what you're looking for a question answer, but I would say for the only dollar line item they committed to the MOU, the $60,000, I would have hoped that would have been in by now, kind of in the city's coffers. Keeping in mind that technically the MOU says 2029 for their fundraising efforts, but I don't think they would have anticipated not having that money by the end of 22. So I guess we have a few months left to see if they meet what they would have had for a timeline. And then on the grant, I think we're ahead because that certainly is something we did not anticipate until recently. We'd hoped for it. We put it in some of our plans and CIP, but we weren't sure if we were going to be successful.
Just a quick follow-up. I know we had talked about we wanted to keep the project at 1.9 million, I think, at that point in time. Can you speak to when you speak of the $5 million total? How much of that, could you narrow your focus down for us and just explain what the utilities cost might be? I know we've talked about wastewater, we've talked about stormwater utility, the Lake George Rehabilitation District, et cetera, state, federal funding, fundraisers. What are we looking at for utilities?
Mr. Spafford, what's your time frame? What are you thinking? Or do you want to leave that to my definition?
Well, we're 700,000 into it right now. We've got 170,000 ish coming from the U.S. Corps of Engineers. When is the plan to remove? What other immediate costs, including studies, et cetera, are we looking at in let's say the next year? And that we would have to pay for, utility would have to pay for.
So on the electric utility side, I would suspect that whatever FERC requires as far as decommissioning, that's something that by default, the utility is responsible for, understanding that we're confident in our ability to compete or be at the top of the list for that now $1 million grant. So, and in the capital plan, the best estimate we had at the time was about $1.4 million left, and that included both some additional planning or studies that we would have to complete, and then the physical removal of the dam. Construction inflation has not been friendly to us, so I wouldn't say that we have updated our number based on construction, although every now and then we get a little glimmer of positive, like this water project on Pomeroy, where, you know, don't get me wrong, that the 180,000 on the Pomeroy project is a lot more than we would have anticipated. I think we anticipated 125 or something originally when we talked about that project 2 years ago. So it's not like project costs are going down, but they're not, in that particular project, didn't go up as high as we thought. So depends on what the bidding is going to be, but I would say that the utility is on the hook for between that 1.3 and 1.5 million of remaining costs for what we anticipate, unless FERC throws us a curveball with something that they haven't already talked to us about doing. The other person that could impact the cost, other than contractor pricing, is the Wisconsin DNR. So it's possible that they make a determination that something related to their water quality certification or others has another $80,000 or $100,000 study that we didn't anticipate. That's not what they're telling us at this time, but that's both FERC and the Wisconsin DNR are telling us, you know, they're ready to greenlight the project and they're going through the process, and we've done all the studies that they want us to do, and the study results are satisfactory. So I think that 1.3 to 1.5 is still where we're at. But to be determined once we start to go out for bidding. And then we would reduce that by whatever grant money we can get, which at this point, the grant that we have the most confidence in competing for is that Wisconsin DNR grant, which is up to $1 million. There are other grants that we're starting to apply for with the Kinni Corridor Collaborative, and there's certainly some opportunity for the city council to direct ARPA money or other monies towards these projects, but that's not the fiscal, at this time, that's not kind of the fiscal plan. So I'd say the net to ratepayers over the next 3 years is probably $500,000 or less if we have cooperative regulatory agencies and successful construction bidding.
So we should have that. It looks like, you know, what we heard early during public comment is we're at 100 and this year we were at $144,000 just on the Junction Falls hydro. So that times 3, we should have that money. So we're not looking at, maybe this is more towards Kevin, but we're not looking at a ratepayer increase at all right now.
No, we are not currently looking at a rate increase in regards to relicensing. Or are we looking at a rate increase? So I maybe should be clear on that.
Yeah. And as far as the steps that we were going to do, Kevin, what was it, option number 3 that was chosen by the council? The wing wall repair, the gate repair, removing the turbine and the line, doubling our capacity. Has all that been done through 2021?
No, we were going to, but we were told by FERC and the DNR to hold off until we got FERC approval. So it's still a FERC dam. FERC is in the process of releasing that dam to the DNR, and they indicated to us that we shouldn't do anything without their approval. But why don't you just wait until we potentially release it? So no, we have not done it and not been required to do any of that. So we have held off. We think by holding off, we may not have to replace or fix the wing wall if the dam is coming out. So,
and And to all the advisory board members, you won't see the option, or what are we calling option 3? I want to be consistent in our.
Had to go way back in the file on that, option 1, 2, and 3, but yeah.
That wasn't included in the CIP because we anticipated doing that expense in 2021. So the CIP is 2022 forward. It doesn't mean we forgot about it or we're not planning to do it. But it's essentially money that we had anticipated spending in 21 that we didn't have to spend in 21. So that in theory and in practice, but I'll wait to see the audit report, but it should have, it would have contributed to a more positive fund balance for the electric utility. But then we'll have to use some of that depending on what's required going forward. So, but as we understand the lay of the land today, doing the required work of removal of the lower dam is not expected in itself to have a rate impact, especially given the $1 million grant opportunity from the state of Wisconsin. Our current operations appear to be adequate for that. So that's a little bit of good news, but I'm not trying to be on the fence or too guarded about my answers here, but obviously that we haven't, as you've seen through this whole process, we have the normal construction concern, the inflation about construction, and on top of that, and Mr. Spafford and I talked a little bit about this on a couple of occasions, you have more than one regulatory agency, which means you have several staff members for at least 2 key agencies, any one of whom can be concerned about something or raise something and ask for something to be further, and it's always out of our pocket. So it's not something they say, I'd really like to look at this. We'll let you know what we come up with. We'd really like to look at this. Can you give us a report, within 6 months? So I think we're marching along pretty incrementally and pretty well at this point, but there's key decision points about this wing wall. There's things about, do we have to build a road or not build a road? Do we wait to build the road until we actually do the construction? Can we accelerate this? And when I say this, I mean, can you do some of these repair things while you're doing deconstruction at the same time to reduce your mobilization? So all those things are in play to try to figure out, where we're going forward.
I will just say too, on those items that Mark listed, there was one other one too, some wetland delineation that we did do in 21. We thought that was an opportunity to kind of hold in place the route where we might put the access road. So we did hire our consultant TRC. I think we spent about $5,000 on that work to do wetland delineation for the potential road route. So that will hold that for the next 5 years to allow us to put that in without having to worry about wetlands.
I think my last comment, Mr. Simpson, and to the utility board is that there's a real consternation out there on the part, not of the KCC, because we understand that they're the coordinators, but the stakeholders that originally came to the table. And just the other day, I read through I wrote it down here, what was called, the FERC scoping meeting that was on November 15th of 2018, 217 pages. And there was so many stakeholders there that wanted this and wanted that and wanted this study. And then if the city asks for this study, can we increase that study? There's hundreds of thousands of dollars of studies that they requested that we ended up putting in to get this done. And this is a real thing out there. And I've talked to quite a few people, and they're not happy with, when they hear that the money hasn't come to the table. And we're not hearing anything. It's silent. So I really appreciate Mr. Simpson, everything that you shared tonight, I think you were being very honest and open. But the reality is, if the stakeholders don't step up the day that comes for the removal of Junction Falls, I think the city's going to have a quite a bit different taste in their mouth towards this. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for coming in tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is Kellen. I was just going to make a comment related to that. In the different conversations I have, because people know that I serve on this board, and they always ask about the dams and how it's going. And they're like, well, you know, how much money has come in to pay, you know, for all the different things? And they say, well, you know, not a lot, really. And I think there is that impression out there, and I think tonight is probably the first opportunity that's been taken to reframe the conversation. That many of the promises that were really flashy at the start that probably kicked this off and made it seem like that this was a really good idea may just not come to fruition. So I guess the question then I have is, at what point or how do we start to let ratepayers and members of the community know that many of the things that were discussed at the start may just not happen, or you know, the different outcomes that this could have financially, and just the general, I guess, finality of what this project actually could be from what everybody initially thought at the beginning.
So if that's a question to me, I would suggest that the best thing the Utility Advisory Board and the City Council, which I've advised them, I think the same way. I think you need to maintain your enthusiasm for what can be. I think putting our energy into talking about what hasn't come to fruition, or what we thought somebody promised us, or the way in which somebody told us it would be easy and now it seems a little bit harder. I think that's a detraction from meeting the vision that the community has for the project. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna, and I'm not just trying to be pragmatic either. Maintaining enthusiasm for the goals that are outlined by the community of removing this dam, and then moving on at a later time to the upper dam and restoring the river. Yes, there was a number of people who made that decision irregardless of promises. So there was a number of people that's the outcome they were interested in, and whether or not we were able to raise private funds wouldn't have influenced their decision. There certainly was people where I think that did influence their decision. I'm not sure those people were on the city council, because I do think the city council was had eyes wide open and is used to hearing promises from folks, and knowing that at the end the city is the one that's got to, in many cases, get the projects delivered. But I also think there is reason to be optimistic. Private fundraising efforts for public projects always, in my short experience, 20 years I've been doing it, there's a lot of stuff bubbling under the surface. There's a lot of meetings going on. There's a lot of conversations occurring. And it just takes a long time to get people to part with their private funds for a public project. And so by maintaining enthusiasm for the project, I think it gives us a better chance for that private money to come forward. I think, that'd be my advice to the advisory board. That doesn't mean you ignore the fact that there isn't, piles of cash been provided to the city. We certainly don't want to get in our own way of that happening. And I think if we don't maintain some optimism and support the partners that have said they're going to help us, which again, KCC has said, we will help you. We are working on it. They are not responsible for other partners or potential partners who, as Mr. Spafford has outlined, said at some meeting that this would be easy, this would be no problem. We're going to get, the founder of Patagonia to give us this amount of money and it's all going to be taken care of. Staff tends to be a little less, I don't know, we're not that nervous about this because we've seen this before. And so we're committed to delivering a project that's efficient money-wise, but also meets the goals. We're too far down the road, so to speak, to really impact, I think, in any substantial way, the lower removal. I think there will be a question for the community if fundraising efforts are not successful, if some of those things don't come to place, then the community will have to decide how committed it is to the upper removal, because this is supposed to kind of be the test project to help us get our feet wet and go forward. So I think that's a real thing. I think there's reason to be optimistic. And I frankly think that with the federal money that's going to be available, unprecedented amount of federal money, the specific interest by both the local Trout Unlimited chapter and now the Minneapolis chapter, and the specific interest that's already been indicated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that what we thought we were going to get is what we're going to get. There may be a different mix of partners involved, and the funding might be a little bit different than we thought, as far as which non-utility partners are involved. But whether the Patagonia Foundation gives us $2.5 million or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers gives us $3 million, in the end, I think still helps us get to the outcome we're looking for. So it wasn't intended to be a sermon on optimism, but we do need to maintain, if we want to be committed to getting this project done, I think we need to maintain our kind of what is the goal, what are we trying to get done, under what circumstances did we kind of feel like we were willing to do that, and those are going to change marginally from here on through, but I think we should keep going because there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. It really is a good project. I think it is a project that can gain national attention and support. And I just don't know how much we should be using the pandemic as our excuse for progress or no progress. But I think it's not realistic to discount that totally. I mean, the last 18 to 24 months, I don't know how long it's been now, but the idea that there has been no impact on fundraising or anything else with the pandemic, I think just not a realistic view of things. It's been challenging in a number of ways, and it didn't, the flood may or may not have helped. I'm not determined whether, I haven't made a determination yet as your city administrator if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it can be a good thing in the end.
Scott, I hear what you're saying, and I really appreciate it. And I echo what Mark says. I thank you for coming tonight to just give us an update on everything. When we talk about optimism, I think it's just really hard to sound enthusiastic when it doesn't look like much has come in. And I know we're talking about that extra 600,000 and things like that. But if it's in some document that the KCC was supposed to potentially up to 50% of the 120,000, so $60,000 to help out with that decommissioning plan. Nothing has come through on that yet, and it's hard to get excited about a grant for the right grass once this project is all done, when it's sort of uncertain at this point whether that bill will even get paid. And it's not, a bill isn't the right thing, right? But that amount of money that's sort of been thrown out there in different documents, it's hard to say yep, I really feel confident that these different things that we talk about will happen the way that we all hope that they will.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think these are real things that people feel in the community, and I think they're valid. The only analogy, which I don't know if it's a good one or not, this wasn't an individual family member going out and saying, I'm going to buy a red car and my budget's 40,000, and then they come back with a green car and they spent 47,000. Essentially, we agreed to do a big complicated purchase and project that we weren't exactly sure what it was, how much it was going to cost. And we kind of were all looking at each other going, we're all going to pay some of this, right? You know, and so now we're in the thick of figuring out exactly what we're buying and for how much. And we likely couldn't have made it as a community to this stage without having some uncertainty throughout the process. So for those that like more certainty, I can appreciate that. This has not been a project full of certainty. It's been redefined a couple different times, and we're still in some uncertainty. We don't even have the $1 million in the state. So even though I'm telling you that 600,000 increase in what we could have got or could have received, we still don't have it. I'll feel a lot better when we have 60,000 from KCC and the state sends me a letter saying, here's, you know, your award for $1 million. Then I'll feel a lot better about our milestones for KCC. But I guess for now, I'll just keep working as hard as we can to get it to work.
I think the only other thing that I would ask, and Scott Moore said, I know you're in the chambers, and hopefully I'll be in person with you next time, is, and Kevin, you know, I think there needs to be a real true update for the residents of River Falls related to this project and where we stand and sort of where it looks like things are headed. Just to sort of get the information out there, you know, because I think for the most part, everybody thinks that everything's going really swimmingly. And that isn't to say that, you know, it won't in the end. But more transparency related to that would be really helpful, because I know we're all really enthusiastic to read city agendas and minutes and things like that, but I don't know how many people you know, peruse all the different information that's out there. So something more direct and easy and concise would be helpful.
Well, I like to communicate, Kellen, so I think as we get a little farther here in the spring, when we hear back from FERC on them relinquishing Powell Falls, and we get our grant submitted to DNR, it might be a good time at that point for a community update. So I'll confer with Scott on that and figure out how we get that message out, but that's a good comment.
Kellen, could I have one more comment?
Yeah, and if there's any other board members that would like to talk to you, feel free. It doesn't have to be the Mark and Kellen show.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw you a curveball here. If we look at Junction Falls of making approximately $144,000 a year, I would throw on the table for the council and for the city, what would be your appetite for spending, and I've had this conversation with Leslie Bronkowski, what would be your appetite for upgrading the Junction Falls hydro for approximately somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000, and doubling the output of that hydro until 2040, where it gets decommissioned? And so, you know, quick math, you're almost at, that's $6 million versus $2.5 million, $3 million. So if there's an opportunity to raise $300,000, I'll throw in the first 1,000 right now. So we need 300 more people to throw in $1,000. I don't want an answer. I'm just looking for you guys to think about this. Not saying we're keeping Junction hydro or dam. I'm just saying if we're going to put the investment in it, it's $300,000, and look how much more you're going to get out of it. Tenfold, maybe more. That was my last comment. Thanks.
Any other comments?
Just real quickly, a little off topic here, but I know that we've been expecting FERC to make some decisions or give us some direction. And can you update us on where we're at with FERC and their process, is the word I'll use.
Yes, I was communicating with the person handling our file from FERC via email, I think it was early December. And she was happy to hear that we had a deadline of March 4th for a DNR application. She said that was helpful to her to take our file and move it more towards the top. So that was the last communication. They're aware of, FERC is aware of our deadline for the DNR grant. And we have communicated, though I don't really think they're also the type for me to nag them every other week. I think that maybe it goes down in the pile. So they're aware of our deadline. They have our file, they have our information. One more piece on that, Scott, is the DNR in our meeting with them here about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They said, don't let FERC's lack of communication stop us from submitting our grant application in early March. They know that that's in process. They know that process might take longer than expected, but they said, don't sit this one out because you don't have the okay from FERC yet. We know it's in process.
That's good to hear. So we should expect a FERC update at March 3rd at 4:45 p.m. Is that what I'm hearing?
Possibly. You know, I'll just take some coaching on that, Mr. Morissette. I mean, so I communicate with FERC, and I do feel like there are that type of agency where if I call them every other week or other people are calling them every other week, it just doesn't end up the way you think it's going to end up.
I would defer to staff. I think you guys have got the best judgment available when it comes to working with FERC and DNR.
Right.
I don't think the council or UAB should get into that detail.
Right. I just felt, fairly confident. Maybe I'm naive, but when the FERC administrator who's handling our file says, it's good to know that March 4th is your deadline, we'll do all we can to get it done by then. I mean, I don't know what else I could do at that point.
Send some chocolates or something.
Right.
Any other comments? Okay, Kevin, moving on, finance report?
Yeah, I do have a brief finance report that Tracy Biederman put together for us tonight, so I'll just give you a brief rundown. It is in your packet, but I think it's always good to go over this. So for electric year-to-date, our revenues are $14.1 million. Our expenses are $13.6 million. And this report is through November of last year. So this is not year-end final yet, but we are sitting much better than we were the previous year. Our cash and investments for electric are totaling $3.7 million. We did, our electric sales are 118 million kilowatt hours compared to 112 million kilowatt hours in 2020. So we did sell more electricity in 2021 than we did in 2020. So hydro licensing, we spent approximately $225,000 approximately in 2021. That was a pretty big year though. That was with our consulting. We had to submit our final license application to FERC, and that was a real expensive process and a big piece of our consulting dollars there. So that's decent news for electric, better news for water. Year-to-date revenues for water are $2.18 million, expenses $1.78 million, cash and investments $3.8 million. Nice delta there. Sewer fund year-to-date revenues $3.38 million, expenses $2.55 million. Again, nice delta. Cash and investments $3.3 million. Stormwater fund, we're a little upside down there, and I'll explain why. Our revenues for stormwater are $537,000. Expenses are $780,000. Total cash and investments $905,000. We did have a Gulfview channel rehabilitation, which cost us $203,953 in 2021. That was a bit unexpected. It was due to some flooding in previous years. So we dove in and we did a Gulfview channel rehab, which was a little over $200,000 and an expense that we really weren't expecting. And that's why our expenses are outweighing our revenues by about that same amount.
Kevin, I will make a comment on the Gulfview channel rehab. I've heard from two residents that back up to that. There's just it's a cul-de-sac for those who don't know where it is. Very positive comments. So even though it was a unexpected expense, I think it had a good impact both on what it was intended to do, and I think the residents felt good about it. So
Good. Yeah, hopefully it would take care of some of those issues. And it was pretty disruptive to quite a few customers along there in their backyards.
it was. I do think we disappointed some youth who like to play down in there when there's water in it, but they'll have to get over that. Life is full of disappointments, as I told my kids. So.
And that's what I have for our financial report. Now with our new finance director, Josh, maybe we might get him or his staff down here really adding some credibility to that report in the future. We'll have to wait and see. So that's what I have for the financial report, Colin. I can move along to utility dashboards if you'd like.
Yeah, go for it.
Utility dashboards, just a couple highlights out of there. AMI meters, we're 71% of our electric meters have been replaced with AMI meters. We could even potentially, especially if we let it up to Virgil and Brian, we'd probably get that done in 2022. It might linger just into 2023, but we are probably a year or just less away from completing the AMI meter installation, so that's good news. And we did get a nice little start on the water AMIs. I think we're 9% with water meter AMI installation, and it's really good to see. I mean, that was a steep learning curve for our water crews on the AMI water meter replacement. It's a lot of work. It's a lot more work than electric, not to diminish electric, but you have to go into every house. You have to make an appointment. You have to have people there, get into houses, and do the physical work. Each one takes about 30 minutes to do. We also do our cross-connection inspection while we're there as well, so we kill two birds with one stone. But that process is going to take us a little bit longer, 6 or 7 years to fully complete the AMI water meter installation. So that's moving along well, and that is not only our field crews, but that's also internally in our finance department, in billing department, to have to coordinate with our field crews. They do a lot of work. Russ is really doing a great job on that, coordinating with both water and electric to get those done. Then one other highlight, for their focused on energy programs, this year we were able to bring $125,639 back into our community from Focus on Energy. Our goal is to bring $2 in for every dollar we spend, so that's right on target there. It's a little bit less than we've had in a few other previous years, but we're still getting 2 for 1, where we send about $60,000 down to Focus on Energy. But Mike Noreen and Stacy, she from WPPI, our rep, they do a great job on working with local businesses and residential customers, and we sent $125,000 back into our community. So that's another good highlight off of the dashboards.
Kevin, can I make a quick comment about that?
Yes.
I was recently involved in a meeting with Mike Noreen and Stacy from WPPI, Virgil and Brian Hatch, and they met with the leadership of the First Covenant Church, and they were looking to see doing hardwire checks to see how that church could reduce their draw. And I just want to do a quick shout out to Mike and the team and to Stacy. I was there as an observer and just listening and learning, and I was just totally impressed. The city is doing everything they can to try to help that church from jumping up to the next level of cost electricity usage. So just wanted to find an opportunity to say that. So thanks.
That's good to hear, Mark. They take a lot of pride in what they do, and I would say, too, it's hard to make people care, but they do care a lot, and they're good at what they do, so that's really good to hear. One other thing about your church, did you guys decide to go ahead with your floodlight?
That's still on the table. But
church committee. It's in committee.
Right.
So we're there for you. You have Wayne's phone number if you want to go ahead with that floodlight.
Sounds great. Thanks.
All right.
Kevin, I have
Kevin,
one.
anything
Yeah, Kellen?
the monthly utility report?
Yeah, I don't really, there's not much I really want to pull out of here. I do have some, what's that?
I want,
Oh, Mark Westpatalska has a question.
I
I'm
just have
sorry.
one question on the AMI meters.
sorry.
Yeah.
What is the life expectancy on those? So those have to be replaced every so many years, or how does that work?
20 years, Wayne? 20 years is the life expectancy on those meters. One thing that amazes me, Mark, on those meters, so there's batteries in them. They say those batteries are supposed to last like 30 years or something. I don't know if the salespeople are going to be around when this go out. I'm not sure. It's a 20-year life cycle, and that's our 20-year replacement cycle. So like, for example, on the water meters, Mark, we're trying to replace the older ones first. It doesn't exactly always work out that way, but the ones that are closer to the end of their life cycle is where we're trying to hit. Okay. 20 years. Kellen, back to you.
Any general announcements?
Yeah, just a couple things. We just have a new wastewater employee today, David Paynata. He will be our wastewater technician. So he just started today. I think Josh met him just last year, so 2 newbies today. So we're really glad to have David with us. One thing also too, today Lene firmed up our spring cleanup dates, and we'll be publicizing that, but spring cleanup will be May 9th through the 14th. So I see Scott Morissette digging for a pen, and he wants to get
Yes.
that down.
That's perfect. 9th
So,
through the 14th.
of May, so be looking for some public notification on that. And then too, I just want to say thank you. You know, Dean Seamuth is here, our wastewater superintendent interim. He's here tonight. Wayne Seiberling, he's here tonight. It means a lot to me that you guys can come down and partake in this, and it's good to have that resource always here, so thank you. And also, thanks to Todd for coming out tonight as well. Thank you. That's all I have, Kellen.
Great. I think that's all that's on the docket for tonight. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Nice move.
I'll second.
Right, and we are adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You were blending into the wall back there like I thought you were trying.